Hello. I can't tell you how many times I was approached with a question. I need to learn some opening quickly because I have a game tomorrow, a game in a couple of days, and I want to learn some new opening quickly. And this is a question will be coming normally from person who does not have opening repertoire and who does not know the value of good opening preparation. Well, but if that happens, we know that average player, chess player, in general, unless we're talking about professional chess player, is a lazy, very lazy person. So a lot of players, not some, do not have that opening repertoire set. So they have to learn opening quickly. Now, why would someone spend a lot of time on learning openings deeply if you can learn it overnight quickly? There is a big difference. When you need to learn opening very quickly on some variation, so obviously you are not going to know this very deep. So you are avoiding all kinds of complications because complications need time to be prepared for, analyzed. So obviously if you want to learn it overnight, you don't have this time for it. So then you're giving up in some advantages of this position. But suppose you are facing this problem and you need to solve it right away. Let's look at few examples. How do you approach to this problem? Well, the example 1, Ruy Lopez, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. This I'm talking about approach for white. And here, normal move and most common move is a6 for black. But there are different continuations such as d6, bishop c5, f5, very sharp variation, knight d4, and person who really wants to get very ambitious and get certain opening advantage has to be well prepared for all those continuations. Now we're going to talk about these people an ambitious approach on the other tape. But right now we are talking about some easy way out of the opening to have comfortable position and to stay away from all kinds of trouble. On a6, the first and simple way to play this position is bishop takes knight, bishop takes c6, and after d takes c6, simply to go d3. Now, playing this way, you forfeited your rights for getting opening advantage. So now you are not in any kind of danger and you are not going to be for some time, but so is black. Now you're playing white and you didn't get advantage. So you lost the privilege of the first move. Well, if you play like this, so you got out of the opening, that's okay approach. It's if your opening knowledge is very poor. On the other hand, if you go bishop a4, your opponent goes knight f6. Now, second case, you castle. This is the most recommended move. And here, your opponent has more options than normal bishop e7 move. If they play bishop e7, well, you don't have to know much about this opening to play rook e1, followed by c3 and followed by d4. But what happens now is your opponent plays knight takes e4, so-called opening variation of Ruy Lopez. Now, in order to get some kind of an advantage here, you have to know a lot of theory, you have to follow theory, and you have your own analysis in it, and you have to fill the position correctly. Now, and if you are not, you have to find your way around. What is the easy way to get comfortable position? Obviously, you are not gonna have any advantage, but get your pawn back and be on the safe side. So you can go simply rook to e1, and now you should expect your opponent to play knight c5, and then you're gonna play knight takes e5, knight takes e5, rook takes e5 check, and bishop e7. So here we are with equal material and equal position. Well, you probably should go bishop b3, and black can take on b3, pawn takes, and black castles. Both sides are out of danger, and again, this is easy way out. So you should look for approach. The approach you should look for is like easy way out of it. That's not the way I would ever recommend to play any kind of opening. But if you have to, my way to recommend is to do extensive analysis, a great preparation, but in case you get you don't have this preparation and you just want to start a game from middle game, and most of the time it's going to be equal middle game or inferior, you should not count on any kind of advantage. So let's look at few other ways to approach the opening. Okay, let's look at the same Ruy Lopez, and we will look at f5 move. Now this is a very sharp variation for black. Now if white plays correctly, they're gonna get certain advantage. But in order to play correctly, you have to know the best moves, and you have to know the best moves in main variation and in any sub-variation. That's what you call intelligent approach to the opening and good opening preparation. And again, you don't have it. What do we do here? There are two ways to play this opening after f5, two ways to look at it. One way, we can learn only one variation where white sacrifices a minor piece and position gets very sharp. But we talked about those kind of positions where you go to sharp position, those kind of players who want to go to sharp position no matter what the cost is. And cost sometimes may be very high. So you go to very sharp position or very quiet position, or you play the best move in the position. Okay, here is what we're talking about. d4 is the sharpest move in this position. Why? What happens after d4? Pawn takes on e4 for black. White plays knight takes e5. Black plays knight takes e5. And d takes e. Now, this is extremely sharp variation for white, but you can have minimum knowledge and play it. Minimum knowledge. Only knowledge you have to have. The reason why this variation also sharp is because black plays c6 and white must sacrifice that bishop on b5. White cannot move that bishop. For instance, if bishop just moves back then white has bad game. After queen a5 check, that's another case of violation of main principles. Black takes queen out in the early stage, but that is okay because there is a concrete reason behind it. And after knight c3, queen takes to e5, followed by d5 for black, and white has bad position. So, which means white cannot move the bishop. Then white should play knight c3, c takes b, and knight takes e4. It looks like white has nothing for a piece, but white has one pawn and black has extreme difficulties developing the pieces. This variation is known in theory as very sharp, was known for a long time, and now it's known that is bad variation for white because they found a way for black to defend successfully. So main move is d5, e takes the en passant, and knight f6. But we don't want to go through all these variations because that's not the purpose of our lecture today. So now let's go back to position where black played f5. And so you saw one option, d4. Then you get to very complicated and very sharp position. It's for one type of players. For people who don't want any part of it, they just want to get out of the opening and have reasonably stable position. Then you go d3 for those players. Then you go just simply d3, and when black takes on e4, you take back on e4, and you have stable position, and that's how it's going to be. You are not going to have any advantage. Well, with a knight on g8 here. You are not going to have any advantage because black is going to develop simply knight f6 followed by bishop c5. Position is going to be equal. This is second approach. The third approach is for people who know the modern theory and who know what the best moves are in this position and how to fight for advantage. They don't need to they don't need me to tell them anything what to do in this opening. So I just gave you, that wasn't about Ruy Lopez, and that wasn't about some concrete variation. This was about the way we look at certain position, and you have to have a sense when game may become very sharp, and if you are not comfortable with it and you don't know much about this variation, you must find easy way out of it. Well, I've been studying openings and doing research in chess theory for over 35 years. And even I, sometimes when I play, I get into the twilight zone. I get in twilight zone, and which means that I get somewhere that position is not very familiar to me. And I don't, well then obviously I take the easy way out. I stay away from complications because it's not going to be the fair battle. If I play some variations and I don't know the consequences of it, and my opponent is well prepared, I don't want to get in there. It doesn't happen very often, once in a great while, but but I spent that much time in studying opening theory. But if you get somewhere, if you find something that you don't like and may get very sharp, quickly get out of there. One example we want to look at is Queen's Gambit declined, which normally is considered as quiet opening. But after d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, black plays c5. Now, you may simply play c takes d, expecting your opponent to play e takes d, and then we get a relatively quiet position of Tarrasch defense. But when you play c takes d, and I don't recommend you to play this move, even though this is the best move for white. The reason why I will not recommend you, actually I should say I will not recommend you if you don't know all the consequences and exactly how to play this position. You have to either play it 100% accurately or not play it at all. After c takes d, your opponent may play c takes d. Now, whether you want it or not, you are in the middle of very sharp position that requires very precise play from white. Queen takes d4, knight c6, attacking white's queen, and obviously queen has to move, since if pawn takes knight, black will take white's queen. So in this position, queen is going back to d1, black plays e takes d, and best move for white is queen takes d5. Now, we talked about it on our other tapes that it's not a good idea to develop your queen in early stage. In this position, we did not just develop the queen in early stage for white. We made 3 moves with this queen. After queen takes d5, black will play bishop d7. This position still favors white, but then you have to learn a lot of sub-variations, how to continues, because if white does not play correctly, they can quickly get in trouble. Let me give you a quick example. Knight f3, knight f6, queen d1. I'm making so far the best moves for white. Now, black plays bishop c5, e3, queen e7, bishop e2, and now black castles long. And when you castle with white, black can go g5. Now, here, black is trying quickly organize attack on your king, and if you don't defend correctly, you may be in a very, very difficult situation. So, 2 choices you have: either learn it to details or don't enter it at all. So that's why the second option, I would recommend what you're going to do when this happens, and if you don't want to enter it. It's again all this tape and all these ideas I'm developing it for you lazy players, and we have a lot of you here. d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, c5. So then you immediately you realize that you may get into very sharp position and immediately have to change the phase of the game. So then you should play e3. Now, there is nothing black can do to enter very sharp and complicated opening. So, what they will have to do, knight c6, knight f3, knight f6. You see, this is the most common position that can happen from queens, most quiet position that can happen. You see, we have absolute symmetry, and it's your move. We're not going to go into details. There are many ways to play here, and we are not discussing how to play a game of chess. So the topic is how to avoid complications in the openings that you are not prepared for. Next example we look at for black. It's a Caro-Can defense. E4, C6, D4, D5. Now, if you play Caro-Can defense, you have to be prepared for some variation, at least one variation that you intend to play. But not to know any variation and play the some openings, this is very bad. You have to be aiming for some variations. If you don't know any variations, you then learn first and play later. So, but suppose, but you know some variation you are aiming for, and it does not happen. For example, knight c3, that's the most common move in this position. D takes E, knight takes E4, and your opponent plays here knight f6. Actually, you play knight f6 or knight d7, and you are black. Now, we're talking from black perspective. So your idea is to go knight f6, then exchange knight, and then go e6, bishop d6, and c5. That's all you know about Caro-Can, and that's what you are expecting. And now your opponent is going to do something that you are not prepared for. Suppose they go knight f3, knight f6, knight takes f6, knight takes f6, and knight e5. What's the purpose of this move, knight e5? Well, if in this position white does not play knight e5, what black wants to do to develop light square bishop either to f5 or to g4. And after that, black will play e6, develop dark square bishop and castle. That's all you know. And here your opponent plays knight e5 move, and you should realize that if you develop bishop f5 like you originally planned, which may be okay, you're going to enter to extremely sharp variation, and you don't want it. Well, unless you're prepared, and let me show you how quickly you can find yourself in trouble. After bishop f5, bishop c4, attacking f7 square. Obviously, you're going to go e6 because there is no other move I can imagine you will play. e6, and now your opponent goes g4, attacking the bishop, and you see that your bishop is in trouble. Because if you go bishop g6, white will go h4, threatening h5. And you cannot prepare escape square to h7 because after h6, if you play h6, white is going to play knight takes g6. And black has totally ruined pawn structure. So then what you're going to do? Then you will try to escape to e4. And after f3, bishop d5. But then white is going to play bishop d3. And you will see there is another way bishop can get in trouble because of the c4 move. And you are seriously going to be experiencing big problems. Well, if you don't know all the variations here, very sharp variations, you should know at least one thing. You should recognize that bishop f5, you may get to unknown position after bishop c4 and g4. Because if you don't notice that, then no one can help you. Then you're going to find yourself there, and you are on your own. which is a bad idea. So what you're going to do here, after knight e5, you should realize if your opponent plays move like knight e5, what is the point of it? Knight is already developed. He has other pieces to develop, white, and he plays instead developed piece. That doesn't make sense, but there is a reason behind it. The reason is that it aimed against bishop f5, bishop c4. That's what we just looked at on 6 g4. So what should we do here? The best move is bishop e6 in this position. But suppose, and to develop a dark square bishop through g7, but suppose you don't know about it, and you are strongly against blocking your dark square bishop to being developed naturally. Well, that's okay if you don't know the right move, and if you don't find it, that's okay. There are other ways. The main point here to realize that you don't want to play bishop f5. So what you can do, you can play knight d7. Try to eliminate that knight from e5. Or you can go e6. You will get slightly inferior position, but you're going to be safe. And as far as bishop on c8 goes, you will later on develop by playing bishop d6, c5, and b6 and bishop b7. That's a way to play, and it's not such a bad way to play. So the main point here I want to make is not what move to make. You can easily figure out which move to make if you recognize the danger. The danger is that white wants to play bishop c4, and you have to be prepared for it. And then you will play e6. But of course the best is to be sufficiently prepared for this opening variation and make competitive move bishop e6, and after bishop e2, g6, castle, bishop g7, followed by c5, castling for black, and c5, and black has relatively good position. They have good position here. But the main point here that black has to avoid those complicated bad variations. Another example I'm going to show you. This is very interesting. Also, Karl can e4, c6, d4, d5, knight c3, d takes e, knight takes e4, and knight d7. Here is another way white can play that can make you think. Bishop c4, knight f6, knight takes f6, knight takes f6, and again you want to play bishop f5 or bishop g4 to develop this light square bishop, then play e6 after that, and then develop dark square bishop. Now here is white's move. White can play c3, and now you see the developing of your light square bishop on c8 is a bad idea. For instance, on bishop f5 or bishop g4, doesn't make difference, after queen b3, you are in serious trouble because your f7 pawn is hanging and your b7 pawn is hanging. And both of them are very important and critical. So at this point, you're simply lost. So you have to know now what is the best move here. The best move is queen c7. So you don't know the queen c7 move. What should you play? You should realize one thing, that queen b3 may be a threat if light square bishop being developed from c8. Queen b3 is a threat. Once you realize that, you start thinking. Of course, if you watch this tape and that this problem occurs in your game, then now I'm going to tell you what the best move is, and you're only going to play best move. But there are millions of these continuations in the whole opening theory. We cannot go through all these problems now. So I am going to teach you the way of thinking. The way of thinking. So this way of thinking will be applicable for every one of these problems you may have. So you see that queen b3 on bishop f5 is going to be queen b3. So now, let's see. What should I do as black? I need to develop, and I cannot lose a pawn. But on the other hand, I need to... Should I go e6 and then c5 later on? Oh, yes, that's not a bad idea. That's good. Should I go g6? No, it's a bad idea, because if he goes queen b3, I have to play knight d5, because after e6, we have our pawns plays like checkers. It's like a Swiss cheese. Look at the h7, g6, f7, e6. We don't want to do that. So, what is the best way to do? The best move, I'm telling you now, is queen c7, because that stops white bishop developing on f4, and also prepares black's light square bishop to be developed on f5. Okay? And this way, you are not afraid of queen b3 because you're going to go e6. Now, if white does play queen b3, now you're going to go e6. And now queen on b3 is not placed too well, because later on, after black develops bishop on d6, you may go b5 with a tempo, and then a6 and c5. Queen on b3 has nothing to do here. Queen should go to b3 if it produces instant results. So after queen c7, queen b3 is kind of pointless move. So that's how you think about it. So you know, once white plays c3, you realize that bishop f5 is bad because of queen b3, and you take it from then, and you use your best judgment. So basically, any time you get to some unknown territory, you have to avoid complications, because your best judgment is never going to be as good as home preparation of your opponent, and is never going to be as good as theoretical analysis, as modern theory. So you have to stay away from it and use your best judgment. And combination of these things will keep you out of trouble until you learn the opening. It cannot keep you out of trouble forever. So eventually you have to learn the opening. So let's go back to another position. Now we're going to look for white. English opening. Pawn c4. Now suppose you are a c4 player, and what you want to do is to play c4, knight c3, g3, bishop g2, and e4, or knight f3 and d3, to stay from all kinds of trouble and then castle. I don't want to enter any complicated variations. It's not that easy. If that was easy, then we would never have had modern theory. So suppose you go c4. Now there are many moves your opponent can play. They can go e6. And now you see after knight c3, d5, and now you cannot go g3. Because if you go g3 after d4, your knight probably has to go back to b1, because after knight e4, you're just simply going to lose a piece. f5. So what you do, c4, e6, now you have to look and think about what opening do you want to play. Of course, you can go d4 and try to get to Queen's Gambit declined, but you want to stay in English opening. So then you go knight f3, d5. There is no more English. English opening is only what do we call English, and when white plays c4 and black eventually plays either c5 or e5. Anything else is not English. So there's two varieties of English opening. Once black plays e6 with the, obviously e6 is played with the idea of d5, now you know you're gonna get different opening. You're not gonna get the English that you wanted. So you will have either Reti opening, knight f3, d5, or you're gonna have Queen's Gambit declined, or Nimzo Indian, depending what black will choose. So this is what is going to happen if you go c4 and your opponent plays e6. So you know you're not going to see English then. But suppose they do play e5. Okay, now you go knight c3. That's what you expected. Now they go knight f6. And you go g3, just the way you wanted. Now they go c6. And here you are facing a problem. The problem is that if you go bishop g2, then you are entering to very sharp position. You have to enter sharp position, because if you don't, then you will have inferior, maybe quite position, but very inferior for the white. On bishop g2, there is d5, c takes d, c takes d. And this position is not good for white unless they try to win a pawn. Queen b3 move wins a pawn. But this is very complicated and is not good for white. But if you don't do that, you're going to have worse position, because black wants to go d4, and you're going to move your knight from c3 and lose another tempo. If you play d4, you're also going to have inferior position, because e takes d, queen takes d4, and this is simply bad position for white, because knight c6, and after queen a4, d4, it's extremely uncomfortable for white. We don't want to go into details. Just take my word for it. And if you want further analysis, you can do it by yourself or with your chess playing program, or just look at some theoretical variations, theoretical book. So what you're going to have to do here, then you will have to play queen b3, and black has number of very good continuations. The best, I think, is knight c6. Now you have to take on d5, otherwise queen b3 cannot be justified, and black is going to go d4, and after you take on d5, knight d4, knight takes f6 check, queen takes f6. This position is very, very uncomfortable for white. Queen d1 is forced move, and now bishop f5, threatening knight c2 check, and after d3, rook c8, again threatening knight c2 check. King has to move to f1, and black plays bishop c5. You don't want to have an extra pawn when all your pieces are undeveloped and king moved and whole king side is frozen. You don't want to play this position. So, which means if position happens on the board and you don't want this complication, especially it's easier, much easier, and a much better reason to avoid these complications after c4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, g3, c6. Now, if you go, when your opponent plays c6, you know they want to go d5. Now, if you play bishop g2, you cannot just quickly play bishop g2 and that's it. If you go bishop g2, before you go bishop g2, you know your opponent is going to go d5. And then what do you have in mind? From here, you think, if I go bishop g2, he's going to go d5. What am I going to do then? You know, I don't like this position. So, okay, then you have to find easy way out of it. Try to keep small advantage if you can. If you cannot, then at least get out of the complications. One move, and the best move in this position, is knight f3. Now, this way I'm preventing black to go d5 because e5 pawn hangs. And if he goes e4, I may go knight d4, and after d5, I may take on d5 and play bishop g2. At least this is going to be simple position. At least I'm not in danger. And the other way to play this position, you have to make sure that black doesn't go d5 and totally dominate the center. The other move you can make in this position is to go d4, and after ed, queen takes d4, and on d5, cd, or bishop g2 simply. This is acceptable position, quiet position, maybe even with a slight advantage for white. And there is a third way. Third way is it is little unorthodox way to play this position. It's queen a4. You see, this is a little bit weird looking move. This way you stop d5 because after cd, black cannot recapture cd because of the c pawn being pinned. So this is the third way. But you have to keep in mind that you cannot let black play d5 and then just be in charge of a center here. So knight f3 is one way, d4 is the other way, queen a4 is the third way. Unless you go bishop g2 and allow d5 and go for this complicated variation. As far as I know, it's not good for white. If you have different opinion and you enter it purposely, then good luck to you, but that's not something I would recommend. So what you do is you have to realize that there is a danger to get to unknown position, complicated position, and you know that you are inferior there because you are not prepared and your opponent is prepared. So that should ring the bell. So that's another case. Well, let's look at another English. c4, c5. Okay, now as I said, I want to play knight c3, g3, bishop g2, knight f3, and castle. That's very nice if I can do all this. And most of the time, you can do all this. But there are cases where you have to do whatever you want to do very carefully. Knight c3, knight c6. Suppose you go g3. And your opponent goes knight f6. Or even e6. Knight f6 is fine. Bishop g2. They go e6. Now knight f3. And they go d5. Now you know what you're going to do. Suppose you have to take. You don't want a castle because you're going to have inferior position. After d4, probably your best square is to go to b1. Now let me ask you a question. If black goes e5, what is going to happen? Did you gain tempo or you lose tempo? Black wasted time, e6 and e5. So this is well-known position of reversed King's Indian. But black, even though black played e6 and then e5, They are one tempo ahead of white. Why? Because black lost one tempo. E6 and then E5. That's a loss of one tempo. White lost two tempos. They played knight C3 and knight B1. So black is one tempo ahead. If you don't think that one tempo means anything in a game of chess, then you are watching wrong tape. So that's why I will recommend after C4, C5, knight C3, knight C6, G3, knight F6, bishop G2, E6, knight F3, and your opponent goes D5. Now you have to know what you want to do, because you do not allow D4 and blindly castle here. You take on D5. That's the natural move, best move, and I don't think you should be making any other move, whether you know it or not, because your pawn is hanging, D4 is threatening. This is the only natural move in this position, and it's the best move. C takes D, and now black has two continuations. Pawn takes D5, and knight takes D5. Now, knight takes D5, we are not going to discuss. The reason is because you can simply castle and go on with the plan you wanted to play anyway. Unless you want to make a best move here, which is D4. But that's a matter of preparation again. If you are prepared for it, you're going to play it. And if you are not prepared, you are okay anyway. So there is no danger in picture. So D4 is the best move. So whether you play D4 or not, you're going to be okay in either case. But if your opponent takes with a pawn, he reinstates positional threat of D4, after which you're going to be in a bad position, in inferior position. So now you have to go D4, and you're going to find yourself in a Tarrasch defense. That's a very famous opening, Tarrasch defense, and you have to deal with it. You have to play this opening, which is okay. You don't need to know too much. As I said, you may not know well opening chess opening theory, but you have to have some basis, something you have to know. If you play D4, you absolutely must know something about Tarrasch. That is, possibly black is going to get eventually isolated pawn, and how you're going to play. This is the normal way of playing Tarrasch. So, and how you're going to play this position. Well, that's something you have to play by yourself. But the main point I want to make that you are not in danger, you are safe, and you are past the opening stage. Now, the difference between passing the opening stage this way and with very fundamental knowledge of modern theory is when you know openings very well, that means you guaranteed to get middle game position that you will have clear plan in, because opening should be a window to the middle game, and you're guaranteed to get comfortable position, and you will know what you will be doing in the middle game. So that's how we just saw very few examples of unexpected problems you may face in the opening. You may think your opponent just on the board discovered it just played something ingenious, what is in reality was invented 65 years ago, and the last 65 years you didn't check modern opening theory, so you are not aware of it. So if that happens, there has to be alert. You have to be alert about it, and you have to deal. I told you the way of thinking. You have to identify the problem. And then you have to use your best judgment to deal with it. The best, and also do not enter some complication unless you see all the way through and you're 100% sure about it, or you have some knowledge about this variation. Stay away from them. Thank you very much and good luck.